Welcome to Out of the Trance podcast. I'm your host, Andrea DeBellis, and I'm here with Dave Danzeiser, and we are back. Yes, and Dave is our first guest on the second season, the Bali season of Out of the Trance. So welcome, Dave. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're the first guest, as I said, on the second season, so no pressure at all.
Oh, yeah, the season opener.
Season opener, and I want to open with a little bit about like why we're having this conversation. So we talked a little bit about how we both share the same values of like this kind of new decentralized world that's kind of emerging. And one of the things that I wanted to know, in addition to what brought you to the work that you're doing now, and I want to talk about the work that you're doing now, but we talked before the podcast and I asked you, why do you have these values? And I think the answer was interesting because we started kind of peeling it apart together. So I want to ask that question, but first I want to ask you a little bit about your background that brought you to where you are today, living in Bali, traveling the world.
Yeah, that's a big question, and it started, more or less a little over 12 years ago. I just celebrated my 12-year anniversary of living a life on the road.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, September of 2012, I left.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this has been a journey since then, and we can get into that deeper. But yeah, I was in school studying and trying to get a master's degree in biomedical engineering, and that turned into where I am today. And
so that was a very different path. So how did that turn into where you are today, talking with me in a podcast studio in Bali?
yeah, I had a very beautiful experience on mushrooms, and the lesson of that experience, of that journey, was that if you continue down the path that you're on, you will be headed for destruction. And so there was this awareness of I want to radically change the path that I'm on, to get off of this path of feeling unfulfilled, of feeling like I was partying all the time, drinking all the time, and I wanted to do something different. Ultimately, I think the path was forcing myself to do something that was no longer alive, and maybe never alive. And it was, I oftentimes say that getting a graduate degree for me was a very socially acceptable way to not know what I wanted to do.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Buys you some time.
Buys me some time.
Right.
And it's like, oh, you're getting a graduate degree. That's
Can
perfect way.
answer questions at dinner parties.
Yes.
Thanksgivings.
Yes. No one, it's different with, you're partying all the time. It's like, what are you doing with your life? But if I'm getting a graduate degree, it was slightly different. But there was always this voice in the back of my head, this kind of looming cloud that this isn't what I want to be doing, even though on paper it seemed so good.
Did you kind of have clues of that before the mushrooms told you?
Yes, I think one of my favorite stories around this realization, or when it really hit home for me, is that I was bartending in a hotel bar, and it was one of these days where it wasn't very busy, and the guy that delivered all our alcohol was there, and so I was in the back with him, helping him organize all the liquor, and we were just shooting the shit, like small talk. And at one point, I asked him, "Oh, how long have you been doing this?" And I like literally saw it hit him like a ton of bricks. It's like no one had really ever asked it. He hadn't really thought about it, but in that moment, for whatever reason, the way I asked it, the setting that we were in, it just like hit him so heavily. And he looked at me and he was like, "Holy shit, man. I've been doing this for 20 years.
Wow.
And I could see the weight of that hit him, as it seemed like it was a job that he just got into to kill some time, to make some money before he was on to the next thing. And day turned into a week turned into a year turned into a decade turned into two.
Yeah, as it does.
And all of a sudden he got hit with that right in front of me. And I had this realization of like, I don't want that to ever happen to me. And so that was a very, very powerful moment for me of like, oh, maybe I am on a path that I should change.
So you had like clues, or you had like impulses of like, oh, okay, or moments, or it sounded like that moment was almost like not just a quick moment, it was like a slow motion, like drop for both of you,
For both of us.
maybe. So you had that moment.
And so I remember after that, coming home from that and being like, oh, I want to change something. Up until this point, I had finished all of the classes, I had finished all of the research, and all I had to do at this point in my journey to get this degree was to write the thesis and then defend it. And so I had even already walked for graduation because I had accomplished so much. They allowed you to walk with the intention that you would finish, that I would finish this defense over the summer.
Right. Okay.
And that, what I thought was going to take 3 months, very similar to this guy, very similar to 3 months turned into 6 months, 6 months turned into a year turned into 2, and I was still not anywhere closer to finishing this, just the last home stretch of this degree. And so I was coming up with all these clever ways to help me get over the finish line with this. One of them was I told myself that I was going to quit drinking, and I could only drink again once I had finished.
Doing deals with yourself.
Doing deals with myself. And that worked for a while until I just found out how much better my life was without alcohol in it. You know, it was like I was using alcohol as such a crutch to be social, to have fun. And when I forced myself to stop doing it, it was a bit crunchy for a little bit, but after a while I was like, oh wow, I prefer this. So then I was again at this point of like, how am I going to finish this thing?
So it's a good deal, but what happened with the thesis? You still didn't do it.
So I still didn't do it. It
wasn't
worked.
The drinking that was in the way of
Right,
it.
right.
Okay.
So, and then after this journey that I had, I came up with the next idea of a deal, which was I am going to buy myself a trip around the world for a year. And I will use this carrot as the carrot that helped me get this last 5% of the thesis.
I love the way you gamify your motivations. It's amazing.
It worked. Yeah. It was the carrot or the stick. And in this case, I was going for the carrot.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell me about that.
So this became the new carrot. And in order I started doing research around like, what would this take? How much money do I need? How much time do I need? How am I going to make this happen? And the initial idea was a 6-month trip. And then that quickly ballooned into a year-long trip. And so once I had done that research and I understood what I needed, I started saving up money and I started gathering up frequent flyer miles. Because the idea was like, oh, if I can get enough frequent flyer miles, then I can get this, what I researched was a 16 flight trip around the world for an entire year. I could pay for that entire trip with airline miles.
Another game.
But
how did you get the airline miles? You have to spend money to get airline miles.
So this, again, was with a lot of research and realizing like, oh, I have this constraint around money, right? I'm a bartender, which makes decent money, but not at the rate that I needed. And I wasn't spending so much money to get the credit card miles. So at that time in the US, this was back in 2010, there was a law that came in that the US enacted that they needed to get a certain amount of dollar coins into circulation. And to help them hit these numbers, you could buy dollar coins from the US Mint with a credit card, and they would ship them to you for free.
I mean, this is very creative thinking, very outside the box thinking.
It was, yes. And when I oftentimes like this, it's like when you're pushed into a corner, right? You become so much more creative.
Find a way.
Exactly. You find a way. And so in this case, I was limited by money. So I was like, all right, what can I find to help me do this? Came up with this strategy. I would have the dollar coins shipped to me. I would put them into circulation. I'd give them back as change while I was at the bar, while I was bartending or these types of things. And
amazing.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact amount of time it took, but it was around January, February of 2012 when I woke up and I was like running the numbers and realized like I have enough money, I have enough credit card points. I can make this year-long trip around the world happen.
Brilliant.
And as soon as I had that realization, I finished the rest of my thesis in a couple months, defended it, and defended it great. This was like then April of 2012. Sold all of my stuff to, again, raise more money for this trip. And I sold everything, bought all my gear, which was like a 10 kilo backpack, 32 liters, left in September of 2012. And yeah, that was 12 years ago.
Wow. I just want to just highlight the, like, another aspect of the synchronicity. So, like, obviously you're getting the intuitive hits. You had that moment with the guy, and then you had the realization, you had the mushroom trip. So it's an intuitive hit, but you're not doing the thesis for what did you say it was 3 years?
Yeah, 2, getting close to 3.
Right. So, and then when you finally got on the aligned path that you were meant to do, you were like, okay, done. Right. So that's very interesting to me.
Super, super interesting because, yeah, for so long I was dragging my feet in every sense, like any way that I could, self-sabotaging. Oh, let me just do this other thing. Let me get into yoga, whatever it was, to prevent me from actually doing the work. As soon as I had everything I needed, then yeah, it happened almost instantaneously.
And it's so interesting because I think when we're young and we're just like doing the thing that we're supposed to do or whatever, or that's socially acceptable, it's before we might have decided what we want, right? So there's a way that we get that information without searching for that information. And it sounds like you were being kind of led because when it lined up, you did it real quick. So it's very interesting to me.
Super fascinating way to look at it. Almost, yeah. It's like I just heard something around how much of a shame it is that it's like when you're living, it doesn't make sense. And then when you look back, everything makes like perfect sense.
Yes. Life is lived. Oh shit, there was a really good quote. I can't think of it, but it's understood backwards, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes. But also I think that's kind of the magic of it. I think it's quite an alchemical process of like, especially the first part of life, we're like experimenting and like learning, like, what do I like? What do I value? Like, where's this going to lead me? And then there is a stage around middle age where we kind of like alchemize and we're like, okay, well, what are these gifts? What are these things? Like, and then how do I do this more intentionally now? So I think it's how it's supposed to go.
I agree.
And here we are doing the inventory.
It makes it so much more fun and I can't even. Synchronistic.
Is that
nice. Yeah. It makes for a much more entertaining journey.
Yeah, if you knew everything, it wouldn't be so fun.
Right. Well, there was another similar thing around that where it's, this idea where the exciting part about life is that it always feels like you're not going to make it, but you always do.
Yes.
And that's what makes it so exciting is there's always this feeling of like, I'm not going to make it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then when you look back, it's like, oh, wow, every single time.
Like an action movie, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So now things are like, you're being guided now to this new path, and you set off on your trip 12 years ago. Where did you go first?
I landed in Sydney, and it was a hilarious. This is another one of my favorite stories where it's like I landed in Sydney. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm in a new place. I'm in a new country. I'm here to experiment with things, and I want to come here with an open mind and follow the yes and always try and say yes. And I remember walking into the bathroom. I'd just been on this long flight, and I wanted to like brush my teeth or something, and I brush my teeth, and then I need to use the toilet. So I like open the door, and there's this like tiny toilet, and I'm like, wow, the toilets in Australia are tiny. But I've like just had this conversation. I'm like, all right, well, I'm here. Like, these are the toilets they have. So like, where can I have a good attitude and just use this and try something new? So I use the toilet, and I'm like, wow, look at me, so worldly. And I get out and close the door and read, and it's the child's toilet. And I was like, wait. And so then I go and open the next door over, and I'm like, oh yeah, those are normal sized toilets.
Well, well done for taking the leap.
Yes.
But,
yes.
And the leak was probably very difficult.
Yes.
No pun intended.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. Because I was just thinking as you said that, because I lived in Australia for 2 years, and I'm like, are our toilets bowls in America that big? And I'm like, they're higher. they have more water, but they're not that much smaller. So
Yeah.
I didn't know what you're talking. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. And so I was like, it was like this first realization of like, wow, you okay, like have a sense of humor and like also maybe take a moment to like check,
Yeah,
like
yeah. Not
gut
everything
check.
has to be yes, Dave.
Yeah, yeah. Or like so different.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Yeah. So landed in Sydney and that's where the adventure started.
And probably not where the weirdest toilet ended because
Yeah.
you're here in Bali now.
Yes, yes.
So, you're traveling and you're earning. No, you're traveling off of saved money.
Correct.
Okay, so
So yeah, that's like the next piece or like aha moment that happens that sends me further on this journey of like, oh yeah, now I'm 12 years living on the road and I'm in Bali having this podcast with you. And that was before I left, one of the distractions that I had was, oh, I'll create a website. And instead of working on my thesis, I'll figure out how to build a website. And
also not a distraction, divine guidance.
yes, indeed. And I had just read The 4 Hour Work Week, and so I was starting to understand this idea of passive income or like other ways to make money besides the 9 to 5. Right? Instead of just going down this path that everyone talks about that I had grown up with.
Yeah.
You go to college, you get a job, and you work that job until you're 65, and you save up money and you retire. This was the first time of like, oh, there might be a different way to do things. And one of the concepts that he talks about in that is affiliate marketing, which is promoting products and basically getting paid a commission. And so on this trip, one of the things that I did that was quite unique was that I traveled super minimally. I had this idea of, if I'm moving around all the time, I don't want to be encumbered by big luggage. So what is the minimum amount that I can take and have everything that I need and also be super mobile? So I did a bunch of research, found all the best lightweight, non-stinky gear that would last the longest and, put together this ideal backpack for the year. And it's like I had 3 pairs of underwear, 1 pair of pants, like 2 shirts, my computer, some cold weather gear. It's like super small backpack like this. And so one of the things that came up from my friends and family are like, what are you taking?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I can't believe you're going to travel the whole year with this tiny backpack. And so using what I learned in the 4 Hour Work Week, one of the blog posts I published was my gear list. And at that time, like in Sydney, I published it. I pushed it onto Reddit, like the minimalism subreddit.
Good
This
idea.
this is the one bag I'm traveling with for a year. Here's the gear I'm taking. And I woke up the next day and I had made $60. Win. And again, a serendipitous moment. That was the exact number that was like my daily budget.
Interesting.
Right. So I had saved up all this money, and for the whole year, it's like, oh, I need to average $60 a day to make sure I can last the whole year. And so then to wake up and see that exact number and have the light bulb of like, oh, if I could just do this every day, then I never have to get a real job.
Right.
And I can travel forever. So that was the first light bulb moment for that.
But how interesting, again, like the synchronicity of like, that was the exact amount of money that because it's all these breadcrumbs that were being like led along. So now you have this epiphany, and I love that you were inspired by the 4 Hour Work Week. I feel like the 4 Hour Work Week is what built like digital nomads in Bali.
Yes.
I feel that was such a paradigm shift for our generation, or, the kind of communities that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah.
So did you start making the $60 a day off of the?
So it was very, it fluctuated quite a bit.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And so it brought this awareness of, oh, I need to have a certain amount of people coming to this website regularly in order to make a certain amount of money. Right. And so I could start seeing the data. It's like, oh, I've made this much. This is how many visitors I got to the page. And it's like I start to see the percentages.
Yeah.
Oh, in order to make this much money, I need this many people. So then the question came up of how do you get more people to a website? And turns out this is the basis of SEO, search engine optimization. How do you make sure that when people search for certain things, you show up in Google on the first page?
And this was like 2012, right? So you were like kind of at these, it wasn't as laid out
Right.
as it is now.
Yeah. Instagram wasn't a thing yet.
No.
Or it was just barely starting. It's
Yeah.
like nowhere. It was, you take the pic. It was Instagram. I take a picture right now. I post it. My friends see it.
Yeah, I mean, travel was completely different before Instagram, and obviously online marketing was completely different before
Yes,
Instagram.
yes,
So, okay, so that's gives us a little idea of the terrain.
Yeah. So it was a different place. And so I started asking these questions. Oh, how do I get more people to the website? And started kind of working on that problem in the subconscious as I'm traveling. At some point, all my stuff, all my electronics got stolen.
Oh.
So then it was that work got put on pause, shelved in a way. But when I finished that trip for the year, then I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself 6 months, see if I can figure this out. How can I make money online, money from my computer? And if I can't figure it out in 6 months, then I'll go get a job in biomedical engineering. And so, yeah, that was 2013.
And you don't work in biomedical engineering.
I don't. That was 12 years ago, 11 years ago, whatever the math is.
So, one of the things that we talked about that we both value is that like radical self-reliance. And so, I mean, what a way to become self-reliant than like you're finding a way to fund yourself around the world, do what you want to do it in ways that are creative, and there wasn't really a formula for. So what did that show you about yourself?
I think it's such a good question. I think the main thing was how valuable freedom was to me in so many senses of the word, and starting to understand how many senses of the word freedom can apply to, right? And it can mean so many different things. In this case, particularly on that, was like, oh, freedom to move.
Freedom of movement.
Freedom of movement. And so there was the initial idea of like, oh, I don't want to be encumbered by my stuff.
Right.
So the first thing to go is stuff.
Very interesting.
Get rid of all my stuff, travel super light so that it's like I would have these moments. I would be in a place that I didn't like, and it was like, oh, 30 minutes, everything I own in a backpack, I jump on a train and I never have to come back here.
That is freedom. But it actually, I wanted to ask you about that because you said one of the big questions you were asked when you were about to take off was, what are you taking with you? I always found people would always ask me, where's your stuff? Yeah. Like, especially in the US, they're like, but where's your stuff? I'm like, I don't have stuff. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I don't have stuff. Like, it was like a mind bender for a lot of people.
Super big mind bender. And especially, and I'm so glad that I sold everything and I didn't keep it, because when I got back, like I would have just donated everything.
Right.
Right. Because I was just, after having this realization of I have lived for an entire year, been probably the happiest I'd ever been at that point, and never needed my golf clubs or my snowboard or any of these things. I didn't need 100 shirts.
Your couch from Pottery Barn.
Right. All these random things. Like at that point, like before I left, as I was selling my stuff, I had shirts from when I was in middle school. It's like, why am I still carrying this stuff around?
Right.
I remember like looking for an apartment, and I had to find an apartment that was big enough to fit all of my stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so having this...
It really is encumbering. Yes, I fully relate to that.
Yeah. So then it was like, people would ask me, where's all your stuff? And it was just like anything. I'm so glad I did that way, because it's like anything I acquired, I was so intentional about it. It's like, I'm going to have to carry this around. Do I have space for it? Do I want it? Do I need it? No. Most of the time it was no. So it created this first aspect of freedom, which was like not being tied down by stuff.
Not being tied down by stuff. Let's talk about the other aspects of freedom that it made you start to look at.
Yeah. And then the next one was the money.
Right.
There's this awareness of like, oh, the society, the world, the reality that I live in is run on money, right? So that becomes this awareness of the more that I can generate for myself, the more freedom it allows.
Yes.
Next
Indeed.
one. Indeed. The third one that I became aware of was the power of my passport.
Yeah.
Start meeting people on my travels who took them months of research of applications to get to certain countries. For me, being born in America, having a U.S. passport, that afforded me many more freedoms than a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there was also this awareness of like, oh, this is a big aspect to freedom.
Yes.
Right?
And there was a small constraint to the U.S. passport as well, when it comes to taxes.
Yes.
Because then you meet somebody who can get into all the countries, but they don't have to pay taxes or file taxes in their country. So,
Right. Yes. And so another one that started hitting me more as like I started making more money and being like, oh, wow, I'm still tied to this country and there's no other option. I have to abide by the laws of this country because this is the only passport I have. And so then there's awareness of like, oh, if you have more of these, if you have more access to other countries, not only can you potentially get to other places, but you also don't have to follow the laws of this particular one. And if you don't agree with something, peace.
right.
And so this idea of like going where you're treated best,
Love it.
right? Which I forget his
Nomad
name.
capitalist.
Nomad capitalist. That's his slogan. But yeah, this idea of
Yeah.
like, oh, the more of these I have, not only can I visit more places, I don't have to abide by all the laws, and I can also live long term, potentially work and like own property or bank accounts and all these things. More freedom.
Which is like kind of like the early stages of starting to decentralize your life.
Right.
Without, I don't think we had that word at the time. I think it's more about, you know, decentralized currencies, but I see a lot of systems being decentralized, and that's one way to start, like the early stages of like, I don't want this central authority or this one passport. Let's
Right.
set the company up here and like structure it in a way that works for your lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember meeting a guy and I think, what did you call it? Flag theory.
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah. I just remember laughing so hard because he had said something to me in passing that really was this idea of freedom, where he was like, got to have your passport from one country, got to have your business from another, you got to have your house in a third, you got to get your wife from a fourth. And he just like had these things where he's like, yeah. And he's like thinking very strategically about it. And it's like such a funny way to look at like building your life.
Yeah.
But it's also different with all of these different aspects. He has a flag in all these different ways and he can't be fully controlled by one thing.
Super important. It's like hedging your bets, and also giving yourself more options, because I think that's another aspect of freedom. Like sometimes when we feel like we only have two choices or one choice, that feels very constraining. And you know, the more options you have, the more freedom you have, more choice.
It's a fascinating concept, and it's been interesting to see how well it works in many areas, and also can be hindering in others. I was talking with someone about risk, right? And like when we're talking about business and, you know, this same idea, don't carry all your eggs in one basket, diversify, can be detrimental when you, for example, are starting a business with yourself, right?
Yes.
And this idea of like putting all your eggs in one basket when you're betting on yourself is a way to potentially collapse risk. Instead of being like, oh, I'm going to have my side hustle and then I'm going to start this other company because I'm not really sure if my true passion of what I want to build is going to work out. But because I have all these other options, I never fully go all in on this thing and basically force myself to make it work.
Yes. It's a great business strategy. Bad Dharma strategy. When your sole purpose is like, no, we want to go all in, it starts, like work starts to get different, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's certain types of business and certain types of work where like, you're right, it is a de-risk to bring all your attention into following that.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the parts in between, because I know that's what you're doing now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to talk about what got you to that point, because it sounds like you're making some choices to kind of go all in on you and the work that you want to bring to the world now.
Yeah. I mean, so in that, you know, as I'm traveling on this trip around the world for a year, there was a lot of changes that happened. You know, it was such a drastic difference from what I was doing. One of the things I started doing on that trip was that there was an awareness that this is the trip of a lifetime, that this is a trip that's going to change everything for me. And so there was awareness of like, I want to capture this. I want to document it. So one of the things I started on that trip was journaling every day and using the journal as a low-tech option, to start cataloging what my idea was. Like, I will save at least 3 highlights from the day every single day.
So smart.
And it was just, again, one of these I don't even remember how that came to me, but it was like, oh, I want to document. And so there was an awareness of, oh, I want to document where I've been and where I'm going and how much I'm spending and these types of left brain style things. And there was also an awareness of like, oh, I want to capture moments, memories, things that fade over time, and be able to, instead of just saying like, oh, I went to a waterfall, or like having this memory 3 years later of like, oh, I went to a waterfall, actually having, the conversations that I was having with other travelers as I'm going to
Yeah.
that waterfall.
God. So as you were doing that, like, what did that kind of, yeah, what did that do for you?
I, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was such a powerful way to ground myself in reality of like what's actually happened. And there was this really beautiful, it's a gratitude practice ultimately.
Right.
So there was this constant practice of every day sitting down, reflecting on the day, and taking time to be present and really think like, oh, yeah, what was a highlight from today? Which became such a powerful practice when I had shitty days.
Right.
And so this was like one of the first aspects of it. I mentioned all my electronics got stolen.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest journal entries was sitting down that next day and being like, all right, I just like my computer, my phone, my camera, all just got taken. What a shitty day. And having to stop and think, all right, well, what were the highlights? And in that practice, it's like, oh, wow, there was a hostile employee that took time out of his day to come with me to the police office because I couldn't speak any Hungarian. And he helped me translate everything from the police officer so that I could get a police report to file an insurance claim. Wow, that's amazing. Another hostile employee, they were sold out and I couldn't leave. And so she invited me to come stay at her family home. And so then I got to meet people that I would never meet and have like a local experience. And it's like those moments might have been lost
Yeah.
in my memory because all I remember is how pissed I was.
Which is how the mind works and how memory reconsolidation works. Like something that's traumatic, which that would be like dominant. So the whole period of time would be that. So it's amazing. So you're basically doing gratitude journals before, we could buy gratitude journals, right? And opening a channel to your subconscious, right? And that, I mean, that's a practice that that I do with my clients as part of the process, because when you do that, you start like opening the door to another voice, right? Because there's the voice that's always like, oh, this was so shit, or you get stuck in an emotional state. But as you said, it was grounding you into like the actual reality, because often our internal world isn't necessarily reflective of what's happening. It's reflective of maybe like one thing or one aspect of it, or one emotional state.
Right. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it like that, but it's such a would be such a beautiful aspect of the work that you do when it comes to that.
And you were just doing it to document, but sounds like it was having such a major compounding effect.
Major. Because yeah, there was that aspect. Then there was the aspect of, the gratitude starting to sprout in other ways,
Right.
which when I'm having conversations with friends and family and they're asking, oh, what's been going on? Instead of just this like default, everything's good. I saw some waterfalls, blah, blah, blah. I had very specific examples that I could share with them, which would then spark my memory to then tell these more in-depth, colorful stories. And it was it made my conversations with them so much more powerful and connecting, and like feeling closer to each other, and them feeling like, oh, wow, I get to see what you're seeing. And when I got off those calls, I had this sense of like, wow,
Right.
this trip I'm on is amazing. Like, wow, how blessed am I? How lucky am I? And like really being able to ground in these feelings of like, wow, this is really special.
How beautiful, because when you're retelling the story, it's like bringing up all the neurology of it and all of that neurology and like, heightened emotions. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with like Joe Dispenza's work. That is how we start to anchor in like the states that we more more frequently dominate. So you're basically, I mean, that's why people do the gratitude practice, but you were like accidentally doing it. Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really inspiring.
So it was a beautiful practice. And, the last bit of it was that because I had the documentation, I was able to then create these extremely, what I really enjoy about the practice is like monthly highlights. So it's like at the end of every month, I could start being intentional instead of just having calls with friends. I would go back intentionally and start to I would reread all the highlights from the month. So it'd like take me back to these moments of like, wow, this is a really special moment. And I get to, again, get it in my soma. Right? I
Yeah.
get to feel what that feels like again. And then I could create like a cool list. Oh, this was the 15 coolest things that happened to me in the month of January 2013, 2012, whatever it was. And then at the end of the year-long trip, I could go back through all of those monthly lists, and this was the 15 coolest things that happened to me this year, right?
Sweet.
And it's just like, whoa, what a year.
That's amazing and so inspiring. And I'm sure it inspired a lot of other people too,
Yeah,
which is compounding as well.
yeah. I mean, anyone that I have seen, it's the best habit that I've ever created because it has led me down this path of self-development
Yeah.
and opened the door for so many other things. But it was all this idea of starting to have a place to look at my own thoughts ultimately.
Right.
Get this stuff out of my head onto paper.
It's amazing because you were just naturally doing what people pay like $3,000 and go to a seminar for. So you're basically naturally starting all this self-development and getting all of this awareness and really in touch with your unconscious mind. And how did that, so you said you started kind of moving more intentionally into personal development. Tell me more about that. So you're living abroad.
Yeah.
You're starting to see this pattern and anchor in these states.
Yeah. So it's like the intentional self-development, like there was many years where it was basically just the journaling habit, right? This was my way to share, save gratitudes and document and kind of track my internal states. I started using it for goal setting, right? After I got back from that trip, it was like, all right, I'm going to give myself 6 months to see if I can make this work, right? So there was this aspect, the aspect of journaling to start setting intentional goals. This is what I want to achieve, and this is how I'm going to track it on a day-to-day basis. Right? It's a very analytical way to look at it, but it's like, here's the end goal. Now step backwards.
I would say it's some energy to that as well,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
you get excited about the goal. That's why you're writing it down.
Very
you
true.
feel all the things, so you're creating future memories, just like when you were talking about your past memories and bringing in the neurology.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, there was this aspect of tying in emotions that I want to have or what success feels like, right? Getting excited about these goals, feeling that in my nervous system and following that feeling in a way. And then having the realization of, writing that down, this is what I want, this is what I need, all these things. And then years later going back and reading it and being like, oh my God, all these things. Some of them like was very tangibly tracked. Some of them were like things that I wrote on a whim, and all of a sudden you read them and you're like, whoa, this happened.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's amazing because like when you set the goals, right, and then you don't look back, you sometimes don't notice your progress because you like achieve something, and then as you know, human nature is we just don't stay on that peak very long before we find the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So your practice of already going back to look at it is amazing because it just reminds you of like how far you've come.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely beneficial habit to have, to take time to acknowledge the progress. And a lot of the work I do now, where I am working specifically with men who are talking about like, I have everything I said I wanted. I have all of these things. And for whatever reason, I still don't feel happy. Why is that happening? And there could be many reasons for it, but one of them that I oftentimes find is that there is no time taken as they are making progress on these goals, as they are hitting these milestones. They're not taking the time to celebrate them. They're not taking the time to
Right.
acknowledge and sink in and stop, breathe, and celebrate the fact that this thing that they have been working for however many years has happened.
Right.
Because as soon as it hits, Cool, great. What's the next one?
Yeah. And how common is that?
In the men I work with, very, very common. It's yeah,
You work with like high achieving,
right. And
highly
this
ambitious.
yes, this idea of what I call the success trap, right? It's like, and it feels so lonely because it's like, oh, the shame then starts to creep in. I shouldn't feel like this.
Right.
I have everything. Why do I still feel like this? Maybe I just need more.
Right. So it's the next mountaintop.
Yeah. And so, yeah, journaling is such a powerful tool to take these intentional moments, to look back, reflect, and take the time to actually stop and pause and celebrate.
Yeah, and you know, taking it back to the freedom that that gives you, right? So I mean, one of the biggest traps, because you're talking about the success trap. One of the biggest traps is whether it be the success trap or the shame trap or whatever trap, is that it's a mind trap. Like we're trapped in our thinking, right? So, like a lot of times, like you know, the stories that we tell ourselves that are happening in our internal world aren't necessarily what's happened, right? It's just we don't take the time to separate it. So one of the ways, you know, I think one of the most freeing things is when we actually start to kind of go into the shadow and the unconscious and start to see what's there and say, okay, I see the pattern or I see the difference. So now I can make a different choice. And that's quite freeing. So it sounds like that freedom kind of carried with you into your work now that you're, you know, helping people get out of that trap.
Yeah, I think journaling can be a very powerful tool for that, but it's like
Sorry.
as I've been exploring it more, right, as I've gotten further down this path, and your original question of like, how have you taken this into the work you do now, is starting to use tools like this, right, where you're starting to play around with the unconscious, and how do you get access to that? It's, you know, it's such a creative question. Like, how do you find out what it is that you don't know? And I think the work that you do, for example, is such a powerful way to start to get access to that and to facilitate a way to get into these parts that oftentimes you can get to with journaling and self-reflection, but it takes much longer, right? You have to be writing out and be in kind of in this flow state and then take the time to reflect back and start to connect the dots
Yeah.
when there can be much, much faster ways.
Yes, especially like even knowing the questions to ask yourself. Or to be like, oh, I've noticed this. What do I do now? And just having like the support and even like make it more process oriented. Like, so it sounds like you started making it more intentional or process oriented, and putting certain like practices into your work now. So you work with, tell me about who you work with and what you help them solve.
Mostly at the moment, I very specifically work with men who are going through a breakup
Okay.
and are starting to ask these types of questions, these very, very powerful questions of why did this happen? I thought I was good enough, or like, why am I feeling like this? Where did this come from? Or why can't I stop feeling this way? Or why can't I feel anything? And it's unfortunate, but sometimes the only way that they can come to these questions is through such a powerful event like a heartbreak. And oftentimes there are signs, but a lot of the men that I work with, and a problem that I still work on, right, is starting to notice those signs. And when a person is so stuck in their mind, oftentimes they miss the signs that are showing up in the body, for example. So yeah, oftentimes a heartbreak or a breakup brings these things to the surface in such a way that you can't ignore them anymore.
Yes. Yes. Relationships or the end of relationships are the ways. I mean, I think relationships and businesses are the way to bring up your shit, right? The stuff that needs to be worked on, healed, dealt with, alchemized. That's how you do it. I mean, you could feel great, just like I could feel great hanging out by myself. I love my own company, but nothing's gonna nothing's gonna get brought up. So the loss and the relationship. So yeah, sometimes you need something to say, okay, this is something to look at and to heal. So that's where you meet them, as like when they're in that place.
Yeah. It tends to be a very powerful place where a man will ask for help.
Right.
It becomes so overwhelming that for once they finally have the indicator of like, oh, I need some help for this. This might be something that I can't solve, you know. And oftentimes I will work with men who are they are very, very capable at self-development, and they have a lot of practices in place already. But what they start to notice is all this stuff that I have used for most of my life, the meditation, the journaling, these types of things, for whatever reason, my work, for whatever reason, all this stuff that I've used in the past isn't working anymore. And why is that? And a big part of it is connecting them back to their body.
Okay, so yeah, what are the processes that you use or that you rely on when you start connecting them back to their unconscious and the body?
Yeah, I mean, I think I compare it to like going to the gym, right? And it's an analogy that resonates a lot with men. But there's this idea that, you know, your feelings, your relationship to your body is a muscle. And for many of them, that muscle hasn't been worked out in a long time.
That makes sense.
So the first step is like, how do you start to like move this thing, like become aware of it even? And recently I've gotten into dance.
Oh, cool.
And part of the dance I do is it requires a lot of awareness of my body. Like I need to be able to control it so that I can roll it in these like slithery
What kind of dance is it?
bachata sensual.
Ah, that's right.
Right.
Tell me that.
So there's like a lot of these body rolls, and in order to do the body roll, like you have to be connected to certain parts of the body. Oh, the chest moves first, and then the belly, and then the tailbone. But if you've never thought about your body in that way or connected those pieces together, it's very clunky.
Yeah.
And so feeling and understanding the somatic experience, especially when you spend a lot of your time in your head, it takes a bit of time. So usually a lot of the first work is like, all right, let's find this muscle for you and start to work it out a little bit.
And I'm guessing they're not all doing bachata with you.
Correct.
So there's other ways of doing it.
Yes. There are other ways of doing that, and yeah, it's a fun. Maybe I shouldn't say fun, but it's an interesting experience, especially for the first time. Right, it can feel very awkward.
Sure. Especially if you're not used to.
Yeah, like I'm always reminded of that scene in The Matrix where it's like your legs feel weird because this is like the first time you've ever used them.
Yeah.
So there is this moment of like, oh, I don't know quite how to walk.
Right.
And so that's oftentimes the first step.
Very interesting. So you're working with guys one-to-one?
One-to-one, and slowly, like my ultimate dream is to build a community of men and do group work with men in this same space, like a group of men that are working through heartbreak and showing and bringing men together to create healing together ultimately.
And I think very needed right now.
Yeah.
So how did you go from, your own self-development journey with journaling and what you were learning from that to wanting to work specifically with men who had heartbreak?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is I had my own heartbreak,
That'll
right?
do it.
And like you alluded to, like relationship and business relationship specifically brings up a lot of, and this is such a powerful mirror to see everything that you're good at, everything that you need to work on, all of the shit, right? So I was in a relationship with my partner at the time. And so, I had this journaling practice, but in that relationship, starting to notice things and have the conversation and the confrontation in that relationship of like, oh, there is something going on here that I might need to look at that I normally wouldn't see if I'm just hanging out by myself.
Right. It's not in the journal.
Right.
Right. Because there's not a third perspective, right?
yeah.
It's pretty good compared to just being in your mind. But
Yes.
now you're adding in like another dimension, like 3D, right?
Yeah.
3D living.
A super powerful reflection of like, look at all this stuff. Right?
Look at us.
And so I was very lucky in that partnership. She was extremely good at asking for help and for finding external resources. Oh, here's an issue. I'm going to go take this workshop. Oh, I'm going to buy this course. I'm going to go to this can't think of the word. Workshop,
Yep.
yeah. Clinic, whatever it was,
Okay.
to solve this problem. And so seeing that and being like, oh, and then also her reflecting like, you need to work on this, bud. And being like, yeah, maybe I do. Right. And so starting in that relationship, starting to do more intentional self-development work that was more focused around specific problems, around shame or communication or these types of things, instead of just relying on the journal.
Right.
So yeah, then when that relationship ended and I had my own experience of like, oh, wow, I need help with this. And also having the conversations with people in my circle and like them being so afraid for me, right? Like having a conversation with my mom, telling her that the partnership had ended and she was so worried that I was going to hurt myself or that I was going to start drinking or I was going to turn to drugs or whatever it was. And like, I remember her saying like, please promise me that you're not going to hurt yourself. And I remember how angry that made me, how angry I felt that this was the only option, that there was no option of like, oh, I'm going to get help and I'm going to work through this and come through it and be better than I ever was before. And so that starting to have this realization of like, no, I'm going to move through this and be better. That kind of like started to light a fire. And also the pain from the heartbreak of like, in that moment being like, oh, I want to make you regret ever breaking up with me.
Yeah, sure,
right?
yeah.
Like having these feelings and using that as like the flame
Fuel.
to push me to action ultimately, which was to ask for help.
Do you think the reflection from the people in your circle was just that, like that you were expressing emotion that men don't often get to express?
Potentially, yeah. And at that point, right, I had done quite a bit of work where it, I was openly crying. Like I remember being in a cafe and like hearing a song and I was just sitting there in public, like crying.
Been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there is an awareness of that, of like, oh my gosh, this guy is showing emotions that are a bit uncomfortable to see from a man.
Right. What does this mean? Like, what do we do? Like,
Yeah. And how
is he okay? Is he going to hurt himself?
Yeah. And it also takes a lot of work to be able to hold space for a man in that space.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To not get scared and
Yeah.
all these things. So yeah, there is an awareness around that could have contributed to it.
So you did you get help? Like what sort of help did you get or seek? Or
Yeah, man, this is such a mentioning serendipity, and this is probably the wildest serendipity of my life, like this whole arc of my story. It's the reason why I know you ultimately, but it's the way that my relationship ended. My partner told me like, hey, we need to have a big conversation and it's going to be hard and I want to do it on this day at this time. And so before that happened, I was in a cafe journaling and kind of like mentally preparing myself for what was to come. And I didn't know what it was. But as I was sitting in that cafe, there was a woman sitting next to me. And for whatever reason, I was like, I have to talk to this person. And so I started talking to her and we were having small talk and she, I don't remember how we got onto what it is that you do. And she's like, oh, well, I'm a relationship coach for entrepreneurs.
Oh, we're talking about Marcella.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Shout out.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I didn't even know her name at the time. And so I'm like, oh, wow. That's what a coincidence. I'm about I'm an entrepreneur, my partner's an entrepreneur, and I'm going to about to go have a conversation that I think is going to be extremely difficult. And she looks at me and she goes, oh, would you like some help?
Ah, the question.
The
Wow, it
question.
just shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Not an
And
accident.
yeah. And so me normally would be like, oh, no, it's fine. Thank you for your offer. I got it. I can handle it. But it was in that moment, it was just like, yes, please, I would like some help. And so that planted the seed of what would be my major breakthrough in this whole entire heartbreak was this ability to ask for more help and be okay asking for help, not see it as a sign of weakness. And anyway, she then gave me the piece of advice that like completely changed that entire breakup,
Which was?
which was she told me, set an intention for the energy that you want to have for this conversation. And no matter what you say, no matter what she says, no matter what you both are saying together, no matter what is happening in the collective of your conversation, make it your intention to always come back to that energy.
It's great advice.
Amazing advice. Beautiful advice.
Yeah.
And so I thanked her for that, and I sat there and I was like, okay, the intention that I want to have, the energy that I want to have for this conversation is that I am already worthy and I am already enough. And so then when my partner sat me down and was like, hey, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, this old version of me would have been like, oh my God, what happened? Let me fix it. Tell me what happened. We can get through this together. Oh no, I promise. Like, let me just tell me what to do to fix it.
Right. Let me fix it or measure up to
Yeah.
it.
No. We can do this. And in that moment, it was like, no, I'm already worthy. I'm already enough. And it's important to me to have a partner that wants to be in relationship with me and wants to do the work to stay together, that wants to stay. And so instead of doing all that, it was just like, thank you.
Whoa. So that was pivotal advice.
Pivotal advice.
Life-changing advice.
Yes. And it still hurt, right? Like it still could feel
Yeah, of course.
like it felt like I just gotten kicked right in the gut.
Hate that feeling.
It's a very powerful feeling.
Indeed.
Yeah. So
Talk about somatic.
yes, it's such a powerful feeling. And so I said thank you, packed up all my stuff, and left. And I went up to Ubud and had like 3 days of just crying, just pure pain. And I had to come back down to Canggu to get the rest of my stuff. And so I came back, got my stuff, and as I'm packing my stuff, I'm like, I have to go back to that coffee shop. And I know she's going to be there. And so I get my stuff, go to the coffee shop, and sure enough, Marcella's sitting in the same spot. And she's like, hey, how did it go? And I was like, not good. And so then I like told her, and she like held space for me and kind of gave me some more advice. But she was like, this is literally my last day here. I'm moving down to Uluwatu. I don't even live in Bali. Like I live in Portugal. And I was like, wow, yeah, thank you so much. And, you know, we became good friends after that, right? She was still in Bali for a couple months. And so we were able to connect deeper. And it was like, wow, she became such a beautiful, beautiful friend of mine and support system.
Yeah. And that's how we know each other.
That's how we know each other.
Oh my gosh. That is very, when I asked that question, I didn't know that was the answer.
Yeah.
But I think also, I mean, again, like what you have described from the beginning of this story is like so many times that you were led to exactly what you need, which we often are, but we often don't notice. So that you're led and then you notice and then you do something with it. So that theme of not asking for help and then in that moment when you're on your knees, I mean, you probably weren't on your knees in the cafe, but you felt that way.
Right.
When you said, okay, I'm going to take the help. It sounds like that's what you're helping men do is receive the help that they need in that moment for them. And then beyond that to, you know, hold that state for themselves of I'm worthy and whatever needs to be healed for them.
Yeah.
So how incredible.
It was a wild journey, but I love this idea that you're talking about because as I was on my healing journey, right, I connected with a mentor at the time who put that concept into words, and it's something I had felt. But this idea of collapsing time, connecting with an energy state from the past, it's like, oh, I want this thing in the future. And I've felt that way before, right? So we can use success as an example. I'm only going to be successful when I have X, Y, Z. But I have felt successful in the past. So how can I take this feeling of success from the past, realize it's the same feeling that I would have when I think that I have all these other things, and how can I bring them to this present moment and feel successful right now?
Yeah.
And when I can feel successful right now, all of a sudden I'll start moving through my reality different in a way that will lead me to this version of success. And his idea, which he calls time piercing, his name's Jesse Elder.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff he says I like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that idea of like, where does inspiration come from? It's from the future version of myself that already has it, that is thinking back to me right now. And so to use my heartbreak as an example, this happened to me, right? Like I'm sitting on that bed and she is ending the relationship. I have this advice from Marcella, but there's also this voice from whatever space that's like, you're going to be okay. You don't know it yet, but this is going to be such a fantastic gift for you. And it's like, whose voice is that? Months down the road, as I'm going through my healing journey, right? I have this experience learning about this concept. I have my meditations. I'm doing all my healing work. And part of that healing work is like thinking back, connecting to me on that bed and sending these messages back.
Right.
Right.
So it was you.
It was me.
Because there isn't really time.
Right. That's the idea, is that there are no time. Every version of us are existing at the same time, and we can connect to any element of that. And that inspiration comes from a future version or some other version of us that has already experienced what it is that we want to experience. And that's why we get the idea in the first place.
So in that practice, does he intentionally have you send messages to the time in your life that was hard?
Yeah, he has a meditation that he does, but it is that it's connecting these ideas of, and he doesn't so much do it around healing. I was using his stuff more for business, but it's the same idea of it's, you know, what he talks about is like, I don't want the money, I don't want the successful business. What I actually want is what I think those things are going to feel like.
Right. Exactly. The feelings that I will get from them.
Yes, I want that feeling.
Yeah.
But the idea is that all those feelings, the only reason I want them is because I felt them before.
Yes. So where did I feel them before?
Where did I feel them before? Connect with that moment in time in the present, and then the idea that all we have is the present. There is no future. There is no past. Right? All we have is the present moment. And so, if I can be in that state of feeling successful now, right now, then I'm going to be successful.
And it's one of those things that I used to think was easier said than done, but it's actually easier done than understood. Because those processes, or that, that way of explaining it, is kind of how like the types of hypnotherapy I do work. Like there's one that's called like ADAC. So it's called a few different things, but associate, disassociate, associate, collapse. Someone's in a state that they don't want to be in. Okay, first you got to get them in that state so that the neurology is fired up because of memory reconsolidation. You got to get that out of the brain. You got to pull the memory out from all the different centers. Have it right here, fully in the soma, fully in the nervous system, in the neurology. Then you want to disassociate them from it so that they're not stuck in it. And then you want to bring a moment from the past and how they want to feel and how they felt before. How they want to feel will only be a way that they felt before because that's how they know that they want to feel that way. So you bring it in and you associate in that. Then you come back once they're associated, the neurology's up, and you have them, you have them look at the problem again.
Yeah.
So that's something I do with people like session one real fast, and it's freaking amazing. But in terms of like how to explain because I always struggle to explain why like regression and inner child work works. And it is because there's no sense of time. And it's because like whatever was, even with like a PTSD and a trauma, right? It's kind of proof that there isn't time because you're in this moment, but that thing from the past is tripping you up now. It's because your brain doesn't understand time. So if you go back to that moment and you upgrade the representation that you took at the time, it will generalize to the present. But and so I do a lot of inner child work with clients. We go back to a tough time, and you actually do bring in your wise self, or you bring in like a wise mentor, which is another version of you. But you're bringing your adult self to that moment. And I always thought about it as more of a metaphor. But I'm getting chills as I say this. What if it actually is because there is no time, so it is your future self saying that to you in that moment, and you got the message then, and then that's why, yeah, it's like Interstellar. Is that the movie with Matthew McConaughey where he's, yeah. I never thought of that way of explaining it, so it's almost like that perspective is very, very interesting to me.
Yeah. And time itself, I find so fascinating, and how can we collapse it and not be so have it be so much in charge of us. And I just read an interesting article about a guy who was playing with the concept of time, and what did he do? He like went down into a cave for like 6 months where he couldn't see the sun, and so he had no reference point. He didn't have any clocks, and so he wanted to see what it would do for his perception of time. And so over the course of the 6 months, he would radio back up to the top. And what he would do is he would count out his perception of a minute. 1, 2, 3. And what happened is that over the course of 6 months, his perception of a minute went from around an actual minute to, by the end, 5 minutes. So what he thought was a minute was now 5 minutes long. And so he had changed his entire perception of time.
He changed time.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. I mean, and I think the concept of time is so relevant to this time because, we talked about a little bit of like before we sat here, like why I'm doing this podcast and why, and the things that I want to talk about. And it's practical tools and philosophies around this shifting timeline that we're in. Like we are in, some people call it the new earth, the new paradigm, the fourth turning, but the fourth turning in Buddhism is related to the concept of time. It's related to the yugas and the wheel of time and this cosmic clock that we're all on, and this shift from, left brain dominance into, right brain intelligence, right? Which taps us into, the greater collective. But there's a lot of development and a lot of tools and a lot of processes and awakenings that need to happen to kind of shift us into that. But it really is about our relation of time. And I do think that these processes, and as I think about, not just ideas, but practical tools, I do think that these processes that we're doing as internal kind of psychotech, there are time-related tools, right? Like the journaling, like the intention setting, regression or inner child, they're related to time, which allows us to really like use the concept of time to move into the internal space and into the right brain. So it's so interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's I find the tools fascinating to like switch that brain. One of my favorite I was playing around with is this idea of, or it's like you sit down, it's like you're going to do your morning routine as an example, and I'm waking up in bed. I like visualize myself doing the morning routine exactly as I know I'm going to do it. And then I visualize myself like getting to the end of that and like thanking this version of myself that's like lying in bed. And then I go and do that whole thing. And then at the end, I sit down and thank that version of me still lying in bed. And I visualize myself like redoing everything that I visualized and like getting to the end and being like, oh, thank you for getting me here safely. And it's like this weird way to like collapse reality into like your thoughts and like manifest things.
Yeah. And collapse time. And if you think about like, there was something leading you down this path the whole time, all these little synchronicities. Who was that? maybe it was future you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do that, as I said, as a process and as a practice, and it works. But I can tell you the neuroscience reason, but not the quantum physics reason.
Yeah.
So maybe there's definitely there's more of a reason, but
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the freedom that that gives you, because one of the biggest constraints is time, right? Like we are like, I don't wear a watch because it feels like a shackle to time, right? So I don't even like the Apple Watch. But so relating back to kind of like freedom and, different types of freedom. And we've talked about money. We've talked about
Stuff.
movement,
Yeah.
stuff, time, freedom from the mind. What other ones?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also, freedom of purpose, right?
Be able to actually choose your purpose and live your Dharma, right? Not everybody feels that they have that choice.
Right. And then I think within movement, right, there's the movement around the world, right? This type of travel. But there's also movement in the physical body, and really being intentional around practices that are about increasing how much freedom I have in my own body, and doing exercises that promote longevity and promote more freedom of movement.
Movement of your own body.
Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking freedom of movement around the world, which obviously got very challenged in the past several years, but which became apparent. It's something that, as somebody who moved, was an expat, I moved around the world freely. And when that was taken away, it was like, I mean, that was a huge learning for me of how important it was.
It creates an awareness of non-freedom.
Which is where I think that, when we first, maybe we didn't even talk about it here, but we talked about it when we met earlier, was like, one of the things that kind of bonds the communities that you and I meet in, right, is some of the values around freedom and decentralizing your life. And I'd asked you, like, where that came from. And you were kind of describing how it just emerged. And I think that is how we learn when we're really defining our values without just kind of taking the values that we received or that we learned without question. We do learn through this experimentation of, oh, I liked that, or oh, that built in me this sense of how good this feels to have this freedom, or how bad it feels to have it taken away. Because I feel that that wasn't really a value that I really understood until, I don't know, the past 5 or 6 years. I'm not saying, it was just when travel was restricted, I started understanding, I started looking back and being like, wow, I really afford myself, if I look at every choice I've made, I don't have kids, I've never been married, I don't have any stuff. If I were to sit down and start taking inventory of the choices that I've made almost unintentionally, obviously I value freedom, right? So why would I think that this would not piss me off really a lot, right? So it's, I think how old are you again?
38.
Right. I'm, early 40s. So, I do think there's that time where you start kind of looking back of on the experimentation of life and being okay, how do I define what I'm actually about? It takes a lot of looking at okay, what was I conditioned to think? How did that work for me? How does it not work for me? What triggers me? It's that's the developmental process that we have so that we can kind of alchemize that into okay, what do I want the next phase to look like? And, I think you kind of go from, some people call it living your karma to your dharma, kind of, Jung calls it a spiritual initiation process, individuation. So there's all sorts of ways to look at it. But I find it really interesting that when I asked you the question, we kind of went into the stories of how it emerged.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it as I look back is an awareness around the somatics of it, which I didn't know at the time. But as I've gone into somatic work, it's like, oh, yeah, there's a very specific feeling that I'm following. and that it becomes less about, for many years, it's like, oh, what is my purpose? What is my passion? All these things. And what I've come to realize is that there's a very specific feeling in my somatics that is this kind of nervous excitement. And when I feel that, is what's guiding me in a sense. Right. And so the projects that I'm working on, the people that I'm with, yes, those play a role in it, but it's less about like, oh, I'm going to be an online marketer, or I'm going to be a biomedical engineer, or I'm going to work with men. And it's less about like, what am I doing? And more about, if I follow this feeling, it will lead me to things that I am extremely passionate about.
That is an amazing answer because, I think that so much of like that intuition, that kind of like, I was willed here, I was moved, like it really is non-conceptual. But unexplainable as well. So it's like, I found that has been my situation too, where it's like, there would be something that would like inspire me. I get excited about something and I would do something that was rather impulsive. Now I say instinctual, but could have looked impulsive. But then I would use my rational mind to explain it so I didn't look like a total weirdo, or I could just like, I'm very good at like explaining things that I do. Very rarely why I do them, right? But it would usually be like body based, like, yeah, like it would just be like a pull from or some sense. But again, something that we don't often notice until we do, or we kind of practice noticing.
Right.
So when did you notice that?
It was after my heartbreak. I was on this like 7-day retreat, and there was an exercise we did on that where the whole, what was it? He told us that we're going to give 3 speeches. And so the first speech that we gave was, you just stand there while everyone in the retreat, which is probably around 20 people, look at you.
I want to barf. That scares me so much. Not because I don't like the idea, because I'm scared of the idea. Yeah. I'm like, ugh.
And so in that, right, he kind of prompted me a few things, and he was like, what are you feeling? And there was this nervous, what I describe as nervous excitement, where it was like, I don't want to be here. And at the same time, like, there's nowhere I would rather be. And it was like this it was like such a subtle thing, like this battle of like, get me out of here. And also like, yeah, this is good.
Wow. How like refined of a feeling.
Yeah. And so it's like, in that moment, I got like a very powerful somatic snapshot of like what that feeling felt like.
You're like, this is the sweet spot.
Yeah. I get it right here, and it's like about that big, like this fuzzy yellow, like sun almost, and just like, whew. And so when I feel that is the path that I should follow.
That's amazing. What is your human design?
I am a generator.
Okay, yeah, so I am too. So I think it is that guttural, like, we're supposed to be making decisions. Well, actually, are you what? I don't know like that much about this, but
yeah, that's that. I forget the name of it, but yeah,
sacral.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Where you're supposed to be like,
Yeah, it's like a very, like, when you connect to that, it's like either fuck yes or fuck no.
Yes.
Like, it's very, very clear cut.
But the way you described it, like that very like refined version of it, is important because like it can get clouded by like fear, like the intuitive, like, oh, I shouldn't go down there. Like, is that a hit or is that like a fear? Like, and it took me a very long time to find, because that feeling where it's like, it's scary but exciting is the sweet spot. That's when like, go for it. Like, things should feel a little bit scary, right? I had a public speaking trauma, so like that would be all, conditioning, right? So anyway, I won't get into that, but I actually stood up to give a speech in college, which I always was very good at. And then all of a sudden I stood there and I started coughing and choking and I started crying in front of my whole class.
Yeah.
So embarrassing. Yeah. So now I still have a fear of like standing in front of a group and then not saying anything. Anyway. But the thing is that that balance of this is scary, but I want to do it is hard to find because fear can really cloud the intuition. Like I thought, like there were times where I was like, oh yeah, I know when that's intuition. And then I would do something and I literally fly across the world and I was like, nope, that was conditioning. Turns out,
Yeah.
got it wrong. Like it took me forever, probably like 40 years to refine that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, we were talking about the feeling muscle, and that's where it becomes nuanced. And it's like the better you get at feeling the separation,
Yeah.
right?
The contrast.
Your nuance becomes, you go from at the start of it, it's like the 20-pound dumbbell feels exactly the same as the 10-pound, because it's like you haven't figured that out. And like to start understanding that subtlety, it's like you have to have been in the gym for a long time. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, the difference between the 7 and the 7.5 now is so obvious.
Right.
Because I'm in here all the time. And I've been working with the 7-pounder for so long that now when I pick up the 7.5, oh yeah, that's different.
Yes.
But that takes, you have to get your reps in, right?
Yeah.
You have to have this experience and do the reflection post of being like, oh, yeah, that was conditioning, or that was fear. I was operating from something a little bit outside of the feeling that I want to be following.
Yeah, I mean, my reps were in the form of like huge fuck ups, but
it's a good rep.
They're reps,
Yeah.
right? Builds the muscle.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, what does this feel like? Oh, let me have the experience. And so now I know what that feels like.
It feels like shit.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Or that I did that out of fear. Yeah.
And sometimes you need something so obvious.
Yep, indeed.
So that you can start honing in that feeling.
Yes, I have found that my whatever it is, whether it's my future self or it's the divine or whatever it's leading me, it will give me a few like softballs and then it's like slap. Dang. So I think the art is to like take the lesson at like the first, like the light one, right? And I think that is, I guess we will learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn. So we can either learn them the hard way, or we can learn them, we can actually be intentional and say, okay, I'm going to take a look at this. And I find that we're in a time where more people are like, you know what? I want to actually do the developmental work now so that I can learn that way. Because I think that, the world it's given us over the past several years, and I think more increasingly, like a lot of like jolting moments. And I think that now we're in a place where a lot more people are saying, okay, I want to take that step for myself.
Yeah. And start to understand when the subtle feather is touching me, as opposed to waiting for the semi-truck, right?
Exactly. So how can people find you to do that sort of work with you?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to connect with me is on Instagram, and that is at Journal Anyway. You can also find me on my website, www.thequestforawesome.com.
It's an amazing name.
Yeah, but I'm on Instagram all the time, so that's the best and fastest way to get in contact with me.
And so people can reach out to you and learn about your programs. And are you doing them here in Bali or anywhere in the world?
I'm in the process of moving it more online into this group style. So that is being built at the moment. But yeah, one-on-one work is in person or online. The group stuff will be coming in the next month, ideally.
Very exciting. Well, thank you for chatting with me today and sharing your story from the decentralized world.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.